I'm recording. Great.
All right. Awesome. Well, welcome back. What is this? This is episode 11 of the Boss Radio podcast. Or wait, is this 10? This is 11, right? Am I crazy?
We can
Oh God, now I don't know.
we'll go with 11 and fix it in post.
Yes, it's 11. All right. Welcome back to episode 11.
Yes.
So it's been a minute now, but I heard about Amazon closing their cashierless stores, or I think they shut a few of them and maybe have plans to close all of them. I can't remember exactly. This is not investment advice. But basically, the reason that I heard was essentially it just doesn't pan out in terms of being economically viable to run these stores, or it just doesn't make sense because basically they're operating all of them through a service that they have called Mechanical Turk. And so Mechanical Turk comes from this like 1700s quote unquote chess playing robot. It was basically just a guy in a box, and he would play from underneath the table using magnets or something and control this doll basically. But for a very long time, people were convinced that it was this real living chess playing robot. And the kind of hidden person in the machine fooling everybody into thinking the machine is self-operating is where the name comes from. And I guess Amazon was running all of their cashierless stores through this Mechanical Turk service where they've got a lot of labor spaces in India and less conventional jobs where it's like you can just, as a college student, pick up 10 tasks or 50 tasks or whatever, and you get paid 4 cents a piece. And if you do enough of them, it turns into a meaningful amount of money. So they were just watching every transaction, everything you picked up, and then they would mark that down as being in your cart, and that's why it would apparently take sometimes hours for you to get a receipt for your transaction.
Right.
So this is kind of an interesting thing. I think a lot of people haven't really heard about Mechanical Turk, and so, it'd be great to get your take on it.
So there's a lot to learn here, especially for startups or early companies or new products at big companies, like starting from nothing.
Sure.
I think we can just start with the good and the bad of this Mechanical Turk approach to building products.
Sure.
The good, to me, on a very cheap budget, you can test whether people like the product in its more fleshed out state without having to pay for all of the actual implementation of building it.
Totally.
So if your goal is to figure out like, okay, I have this vision for this really cool, I think it's a really cool product, but I want to prove that it solves someone's actual problems or needs, or I just want to prove that people want this, or I want to prove that there is a ton of demand or willingness to pour money into this like problem space, then yeah, I think it does make total sense to run an experiment. You could call it an experiment.
Sure, yeah.
Where you fake the product, like you do something hacky that's on a low budget that lets you sort of pretend that the product has already been built.
Sure.
Right. And then you put it out there to some subset of the public.
Right, exactly.
It kind of reminds me of audience testing for movies, for
like a pre-screening.
Comedians do this too. Like comedians will do, they'll test material. Like they'll travel around the country and test all their material to see which jokes work with any part of the country.
Sure.
So I think there's all sorts of good reasons to take this approach.
Yeah.
There's probably a bunch of others, but let me just like move on to the bad. I think pushed too far, you're just always faking the product and never actually building it. Like, if you push this philosophy too far, fraud is okay.
Yeah.
Like, lying to people about what you've actually built, and not just people, but lying to investors,
Totally.
Right? Lying to stakeholders, lying to people for whom the truth or falsehood of what you're telling them might affect their health, safety, or financial well-being. Like, at some point, you start to just think, oh, building products is about lying to people. I can just make this chessboard and not really build the robot. I can just put a human underneath the chessboard and like, that's cool. Everyone's cool with it. No, like that's fraud. Like you can't tell investors, I built this robot, but you didn't build the robot, right?
Totally.
So it's a delicate balance, I think. But some ways to keep the line clear between doing this well and doing this not well is just don't lie to investors.
Sure.
Try not to lie to users. Like I can't believe I'm even qualifying that, but like,
right.
I could see in some instances why you would want users to have the perception, the like,
Totally.
the subjective perception that they're playing with a real product, because You're worried if you tell them, oh, by the way, this is just a human being, this isn't an actual robot. You're worried that you're not going to get their real reaction to if you had built the robot.
Totally.
So
I actually worked for Amazon back when they were initially creating the first series of Amazon Echo devices. And I wasn't part of the program at the time, but we kind of heard about it afterwards, how they approached prototyping the service and what they did, why they went with, they actually did a mechanical Turk, exactly a bunch of humans literally sitting behind a curtain or on the other side of a wall. And when someone made a voice request, they had like 4 or 5 people sitting there scrambling to type in the search request as fast as possible into the Amazon search. And then they would select a result and have it read out by the Amazon voice.
Right.
So like for the sake of prototyping and getting the person's experience, I think Amazon always had the intent, they always had the expectation that it was going to be a kind of robotic interpretation of the recordings that operated the whole thing and there weren't going to be humans involved.
Right.
And so I think it makes sense in that case to tell your research participant that this is all automated. Like
right.
It's okay to lie to them in that case because you want to get their reaction as though it were automated to see how they feel.
Yeah.
But when you go into production, you end up in this place where it's not just that you're misleading customers, but as you mentioned before, their safety could be on the line.
Right.
You don't necessarily know all of the relationships that people have and how they're connected around the world or what's going on. Just truly, you don't know what you don't know. And so, like, because I mentioned India before, and I do know that they run a lot of services. Like, I think Americans are kind of passively aware of how many of these kind of labor jobs call centers in India handle, but they handle a ton for Americans. And this is just another thing. Like, but say you're somebody who's from India, you might have family working in that call center who actually hears your own voice request.
Sure.
So it's like, maybe this is a reach, maybe it's not likely to happen, but there's a huge gap between it's not likely to happen and this is all operated by a machine and totally anonymous and it is impossible. Like, if people believe that it's impossible, they may do things that put their safety on the line unwittingly.
Totally.
And if they knew that it was a human listening, they wouldn't.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's like a really big difference between going to production with a product and then, as you mentioned, with investors also, when the Amazon Go cashierless stores were launched, I was also at Amazon at that time, and they made a big deal of it. They didn't tell even us internally. I mean, I'm sure within the narrow team they knew, but more broadly, they didn't tell us that it's all being operated by Mechanical Turk and that somebody is watching video recordings of all the things you pick up and put into your basket. We just had no idea.
Yeah.
And this is even internally working. So at the time I thought, wow, I don't have a huge amount of money that I can invest in this right now, but I wish I did, because definitely this is going to be the technology that takes over Walmart and takes over just retail in general. It's all going to be cashierless in 5 years, I thought.
Right.
And then, of course, it just didn't pan out that way. And I never really understood why.
Sure.
But now here, so many years later, we found out, actually, even to this day, it's still some huge percentage of all of the transactions are being monitored or double checked by a human being. And that's why they could never roll it out to other companies, is because like it's actually,
sure,
it's still that kind of skunk works fake product.
Like,
it's not a real thing.
So we've covered a little bit about the good and the bad, and my guess was that I was sort of going to skip over a lot of the other things you could say about the good. Obviously, it's hard to overstate how helpful it is that this is enormously time-saving and budget-saving. To fake a product, you don't have to build it. That's amazing, because 9 times out of 10, there isn't demand for your idea.
Totally.
There is no market pull. You're going to have to change your idea before you find the right version of it where people actually need it. So
totally.
Can you imagine hiring an engineering team or a couple engineers to build your product, paying all that money, spending all that time, only to find out the same thing you found out by faking the product, which is that no one needs this.
Yeah.
And for the same reasons. Maybe you could say by building it, you learned there's some valuable knowledge there about what it means to build in this space that you're going to carry over to the next product.
Totally.
But still, like, this is largely wasted time and money, which is your most precious set of resources when you're just starting out, when you have nothing. So it can't be overstated how important it is to test that people actually need this thing, or that, you know, it passes muster with the right regulatory environment. There's all kinds of things you can learn about a product by faking.
Totally.
I was also going to say, what's interesting to me about faking products, or like Mechanical Turk approach, is you can fake like 8 products in parallel. But imagine building 8 products and testing those in parallel, like, goodness sakes.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really powerful.
Totally. It's not just the management of those products, but like the amount of teams that you'd need and the amount of people. It's like,
yep,
to build one product is a Herculean effort.
Yeah.
And the ability to kind of pivot quickly is something that you can only really do if you find a way to cut corners.
Yeah.
And I guess when it comes to cutting corners, it's important to figure out which ones are the right ones to cut. Like, where is it okay? Where are your customers going to be comfortable if they find out later?
Yeah. I also wanted to give a few examples of like things I see people doing out there in the wild that are really common and that are basically honest. So the most common thing I see is a survey. A survey, in a way, is a fake product. It's like saying, do I understand your problems? Like, do you, the user, have these problems that I think you have? Yes, 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 yes. And then it's like, okay, if I built this set of features, would that solve this specific problem? Yes or no, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And by the end of the survey, hopefully you have some idea about whether people would actually be willing to spend money. Like, usually at the end of the survey, they even say, okay, now that you've answered all these yeses, put your money where your mouth is. Like, pay us $20 for like the alpha version of this product, or whatever. I feel like that's very honest. Everyone knows it's a survey.
Sure.
So the other version I see is limited user testing. So it's like, hey, you know, you've signed up, and maybe we're even paying you as a alpha user, or not, I guess, whatever. It's just like a test user, let's say.
Right.
And we're like paying you, or you've signed up because you're really passionate about this space. Just so you know, this is like an early version of the product. It's super hacky. You know, it's kind of faked.
Sure.
It's mostly fake. We're actually using like WhatsApp for half of it. We're using other people's products to kind of pretend that we've built out chat, whatever. And so we're just trying to learn from you, the paid user or the paid tester, how people interact with this thing, if it's useful, what its weaknesses are.
Totally.
Again, super honest, that you're not like, you know, the user knows what you're trying to learn from them. They know that it's testing. They know that like half the things aren't going to work.
Honestly, I think that there's some really interesting opportunities to potentially leverage Mechanical Turk to create products. And there's places where even if it's a job that people want to do, or maybe a job that people are willing to do, maybe it's just safer or better to have it remotely operated. And the difference between a permanent remote operator and a quote unquote Mechanical Turk, like it could just be an anonymous person running this one task this one time. There are times and cases for that. So let's touch on this again in the future. And next time, I really want to dive into this topic of the product creation mindset and what does it take to make a great product and what kinds of corners are you willing to cut?
Sure.
Essentially, how can you do this incredibly challenging thing and do it in a way that gets you to market and actually gets done?
It's like a scrappy mindset. And I've met a lot of people who come from big companies that lose this mindset over time. And then when they go to work at a startup or they go to start a startup, oh my gosh, it's like they hit a brick wall.
Totally. It's just such a different place to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, awesome. Let's dive into that next time.
Sounds great.
That was it.
Woo-hoo.
Thanks so much for joining us. Like, subscribe.
I can't even say woohoo because of my voice.
Oh no.